Well, in the end, it didn't take Lewis starting on the red Pirelli soft tyre for Valtteri Bottas to win this Russian Grand Prix. He won it with ease, he won it with control, he set the fastest lap, he looked very good from the beginning till the end. He was aggressive even into turn one, trying to get Lewis on the outside on those medium tyres. So Valtteri Bottas won the Russian Grand Prix. That's the first thing that needs to be said. Secondly, and I'll get back to Valtteri in a little bit, but let's just talk about Lewis Hamilton's race, because there's quite a lot of stuff flying around at the moment. Lewis has said openly that he thinks they're out to get me, of course, because I'm leading the championship and they want to make the championship, they want to make the racing a lot more interesting. I don't actually buy that, Lewis, only because I think that if Mika Salo and the other stewards had wanted to do something relatively deliberate like that, well, just deliberate like that, forget the relativity, if they wanted to do something like that, I don't think they would have needed to have done it in Sochi, because it was pretty clear that Valtteri had the advantage anyway. I mean, if this was both of you on the yellow tyres or both on the red, maybe you could start looking at conspiracy theories like that, but I don't think that was the case. I think that this is, and here's the actual rule, let's just have a look at it. It is, yeah, it's fairly basic rule. I think you could understand that. But there's Lewis doing a sort of Ayrton Senna and saying, it's really dirty here where I'm going to do the practice starts. Can I go up to the exit of the pit lane and do them there, so long as I'm not in the way of the faster cars? And he gets the okay from the team. So the first thing is that this is a Lewis Hamilton team thing. It's not necessarily just Lewis out there doing something silly. So it was the team decision underlying what Lewis was thinking and doing. And to me, the way the penalty was applied, 2 5-second penalties for the 2 practice starts, is a little bit like, and I know that not that many of you probably are familiar with the laws of cricket, or indeed understand how cricket's played, but for those of you that do, for me, this was a little bit like a bowler hitting the stumps as he's about to deliver the ball because the batsman has started to back up and he's out of his crease. Now, that isn't done in cricket these days. You give the guy a warning and then he doesn't do it again. But in theory, it's out. And if you go for it, I think it still would be out by the laws of cricket. I think that's pretty much what we saw the stewards doing today. I think we saw them exercising the rule, the law, absolutely to the letter. Now, that's what would irk Lewis, and I guess he would think, well, that comes with the territory, and that's what Toto Wolff would be saying to him. That comes with the territory of dominating a championship the way it is. The important thing now is to stay mentally strong, not think about the additional penalty points he now has on his license, which takes him relatively near actually a race suspension if too many other things happen. And that will prey on his mind. What else can I do wrong? Well, going back to Ayrton Senna, my advice to Lewis Hamilton, if I was running him, managing him, or whatever, which I'm not, but if I was, I would be saying, yes, Ayrton would be paying attention to things like where he can best do a practice start, that he wants the road surface that best simulates that of the grid where he's about to pull up, in other words, the clean side of the grid because he's on the pole. But at the same time, another thing that Ayrton Senna always did, and I knew him pretty well, even from his Formula Ford 2000 days, let alone Formula 3 and then into Formula 1. Ayrton always made a point of getting to the track relatively early and getting to know a little bit the stewards of the meeting and getting to, just even if it's just like, hi, how are you? I'm Ayrton Senna. Where do you live? What are you all about? Just because he wanted to get a feel for the way the stewards think and who they are and what they are, so they're humans rather than just numbers or names. And I don't think, I mean, maybe Lewis is doing that. If he is doing that already and he has this sort of, that's part of his homework of getting to every Grand Prix, getting to know the stewards, because they're all different, of course, race by race. We have some permanent stewards, but there are also some temporary stewards as well, race by race stewards. And if Lewis is not paying attention to that particular detail, it does behove him to do that for the remaining races, because it's going to get more and more political, it's going to get more and more fractious if things like this continue. And the pattern is there now, an odd penalty at Monza and now a relatively odd penalty in Russia. And as Lewis would be saying in his own mind, I've done that similar thing, in other words, made starts at the end of the pit lane, right at the exit, millions of times in millions of races. So he'll be thinking, nothing explains why I got the 10-second penalty today. So Lewis, my advice would be just calm it and get to know the stewards of the meeting, watch the starting procedures for the support races, get a feel for the way they're all thinking and acting, and as Ayrton Senna used to do. And you were a great disciple of Ayrton's from what I know. Anyway, that was that. I think also it needs to be borne in mind that this was always going to be Valtteri Bottas's race, unless Lewis could do something unbelievably special on the red tyres in the first phase of the race, and indeed simultaneously Valtteri had some sort of problem, i.e. maybe Max Verstappen in front of him holding him up a bit. That didn't happen anyway, so the most Lewis was going to be today was second, P2, and he ended up P3 because of the penalty. He should be thinking, that was a pretty good day for me. Bearing in mind he had that 10-second penalty thrown into the pit stop, I still finished third, and I could keep Max Verstappen relatively honest. I think that was a pretty good day for Lewis, and he got a podium finish. You know, he's third in the Russian Grand Prix. You know, actually, to be honest with you, I think the slightly more worrying thing about this race, not worrying, I think the thing that's deserving of just as much attention is the way Valtteri Bottas reacted to his win. And here's the quote from Valtteri as he crossed the line. Now, this to me reeks of Juan Pablo Montoya at the 2005 British Grand Prix, when it was Kimi Raikkonen's race. Kimi had a problem and Juan Pablo won the British Grand Prix. And after that, I remember talking to him and he said something along the lines of, well, now I've proved I'm better than Kimi, and now I hope everybody at McLaren listens to me. And it was like, whoa, where did that come from? You know, you're not as quick as Kimi at the moment, Juan Pablo. There's still a bit of work to be done there. And I was surprised that Valtteri said that, because he's always been very even-keeled, I think, and very mature in his approach. And I think that sort of chip on the shoulder reaction to the critics. I mean, I don't know what he means by the critics. I mean, if he means somebody like me who's been saying all year that Lewis is quicker for these reasons, this is what he's doing on these corners that Valtteri's not doing. And if he thinks that winning the Russian Grand Prix as he did today proves that I'm completely wrong, then I'm sorry, Valtteri, then that's not the case. He mentioned that some people have been saying that they've been writing or saying or whatever that he should retire or get out of it. I mean, of course, I've not been saying that. I've been saying all along that he's the perfect teammate to Lewis Hamilton and the perfect teammate within the Mercedes entourage anyway. But I found it very odd that he would be thinking that way, having won the Russian Grand Prix the way he did today on a different tyre to Lewis with the penalty. It didn't vindicate anything so far as his pace against Lewis is concerned. It just rewarded his hard work with a win, which was always going to happen. If you are in the other Mercedes and Lewis Hamilton's in one car and you're in the other, you are, by the law of averages, going to win some races because it's a very, very good car, and Lewis isn't going to win every race. So he did what he should have done. But having said that, you know, this didn't vindicate anything, I don't think, because you know, where were the shorter corners, Valtteri, in qualifying? Where was the brilliant braking under turn in, the transition of load going into turn 13 that we saw with Lewis that we didn't see with you in qualifying? So those are the little details that I think Valtteri needs to be looking at. But to be saying that this proves that everybody was wrong about me, I don't know what that was all about. Anyway, so Valtteri did win the race, and congratulations to him. Hats off to him in a way that is appropriate, I think. On the day when Lewis had a problem, Valtteri Bottas won in the other Mercedes. He hasn't done that on occasions this year, as we know, but he did it today in Russia, and full marks to him. Max Verstappen, what a drive again from Max. Just as good as his qualifying performance, but now parlayed that into a beautiful race from beginning to end. Took a very nice dodge going into what I would call turn one. Actually, it's turn 2 of the circuit, but the first proper corner of the circuit. Around the outside, realized there was going to be a problem and just went onto the escape road and beautifully through the chicane. Lost a position to, well, didn't lose position, lost track ground, if you like, to Daniel Ricciardo. But then he's on it. He's going through turn 3, the long left-hander. He's right behind Daniel. And going into 4, the tight right, which is the corner where Sebastian Vettel shunted yesterday, he's on Daniel, and guess what? Daniel just bobbles out of the corner, as Mario Andretti would say. It's not a moment. He just seems to be very conservative on exit, and Max gets him into turn 5. Absolutely brilliant. And then simultaneously, Esteban Ocon, who's behind Max does the same thing to Daniel 2 corners later. So yeah, a weird opening lap by Daniel Ricciardo, who is normally very, very good in those early traffic situations, particularly good at restarts, as we've seen over the years. So that was a strange one. There was a moment when Lewis had, once he got onto the hard tyre, there was a moment when Lewis was going relatively quickly, sort of matching Max, but then Max just put in the hard work. And there was a lovely moment when Red Bull started to give him information about the gaps. And he said, look, I'm not interested in gaps. I'm just going to drive my own race. Classic Max Verstappen. And that's exactly what he did. Brilliant drive, I thought, into second place. There's quite a lot of criticism of Lewis after the race, and it's not long over anyway, also about his radio interaction about when he should come in for the change to the hard tyre. He wanted to stay out, once he knew he had this 10-second penalty, he wanted to stay out as long as possible, which to me kind of makes sense. Let's just use this tyre to the maximum, I can thrash it to bits, and then I'll come in and see what we can do on the hard tyre. But of course he was making that calculation based on the 10 seconds being added to his overall race time. He wasn't based it on having to take the 10 seconds during the tyre pit stop. And if that had been the case, the more logical thing obviously was to get him in as soon as possible and get him out on the hard tyre, which is actually what Mercedes made him do, and it's actually what he did. And then finally, so far as criticism for Lewis goes, I've had a few emails already from friends saying, oh, I've gone off Lewis Hamilton completely. He didn't even try once he knew he'd got that 10-second penalty, once he'd served it, once he's on the hard tyre, he just gave up. Well, I don't buy that either, because he was setting green times, which is his personal best, at least halfway, if not 2/3 of the way through that second stint on the hard tyre. And he still beat Sergio Perez, who had got a pretty good car underneath him today. And he had that 10-second penalty, and he started on the wrong tyre. So he thrashed Perez and did a very good job overall. So I don't buy that either. I don't think Lewis gave up at any stage. He did say afterwards, I didn't do much today because the parameters of what he could achieve had been defined for him after about 4 laps of the race. But the point is that within those parameters, Lewis got the result, the only result he could have achieved for the team. And I think that was a good drive. P4, as I say, Sergio Perez did a very good job for Racing Point, went round and round and round. He was the sort of Sergio that we know can deliver that sort of drive. It wasn't necessarily a time management day. He was pretty good. There was a nice pass or two as well, showing some aggression, very good in defence as well. So good drive by Sergio for Racing Point, making up indeed for Lance Stroll, who was trying to go around the outside of Charles Leclerc going into turn 4, which is the tight right where Sebastian Vettel shunted yesterday. And he's on the outside, and Charles just sort of turning in as normal and using a bit of road coming out as normal. And there's Lance on his left and hits Charles and bounces into the wall on the inside. That was right on the opening lap of the race. I don't blame Charles for that at all. And I think at that moment, obviously, Lance had got some sort of run on Charles and was right on him and moved to the left going into the right. But at that moment, you say, right, all bets off. I kind of got to nuzzle in behind him and follow him out of the corner, or indeed drop back a bit and try to get him on a run into the next corner. Would have been the more logical thing, but he didn't, and he hit the wall. So the second Racing Point, which for sure would have been top 6 today, in the wall on the opening lap. Speaking of in the wall on the opening lap, this is what Carlos Sainz said after his shunt. He took to the runoff area on the outside of the first corner of the race, turn 2 they call it, the tight right-hander, because it was all getting a bit congested in front of him. But he's only just moved off onto the runoff area, and the actual space where he's got to go through the chicane is quite a way to the left. So he leaves that move very late. But this is Carlos Sainz. This is the man with perfect judgment, unbelievable reflexes, and amazing car control. He's not Mr. Finesse like Charles Leclerc, as we've said in many videos before. But one thing Carlos has is amazing. You would imagine that on an auto test, when you've got to reverse a car, do a handbrake turn and get going, you'd imagine this would be the forte for Carlos Sainz. But no, he goes through there and he hits the wall on the left. I mean, every time we watch that on a replay, it's like, oh, that to me is one of the worst things you could possibly look at, and just takes the left front corner off the McLaren. Basic bad judgment, basic bad driving, complete waste of all the work and effort that everybody's put in a ridiculous shunt that should never have happened at all. And there are a lot of Carlos Sainz fans out there, and I have to say, I'm a Carlos Sainz fan because I know his dad pretty well, I know the family really well, and I've known him ever since he was racing Formula BMW. But this is the sort of thing, no matter how many people put their arm around him now and say, don't worry about it, Carlos, you know, think of the next race. These things happen. We all make mistakes. This was a serious mistake. And this is the sort of thing that will live with you and take some of your confidence away, even without thinking about it. It'll eat away at you. And that was a big, big moment, I think, for Carlos's career. And if you're Ferrari right now and you've just watched Charles Leclerc drive this beautiful polished race into 6th place, could have been 5th. I mean, he was within 5 seconds of Daniel Ricciardo for a while, and Daniel did have that 5-second penalty later on in the race for misusing the runoff area at turn 1, as I call it. But if you're Ferrari, you're thinking, we've got Charles and we're replacing Sebastian with this guy who's just driven into a brick wall. I mean, that shunt, I haven't seen something like that off the racetrack for a long time. I'm trying to think when I have seen it, actually. I suppose, you know, in terms of daft things, you could say, I suppose Vittorio Brambilla throwing his hands high in the air, winning the 75 Austrian Grand Prix in the wet, and then aquaplaning into the guardrail as he's going across the line to win the race. I suppose that's fairly bizarre. But then I'm thinking of, you know, misjudgment of an apex like that. And it was an apex, let's face it. It's quite a quick bit of road. I mean, and when we were watching that during practice and qualifying, it's easy for me to say it now, but when we were watching onboards of drivers going through there flat out, I was thinking, that's quite an interesting bit of road that. You wouldn't want to misjudge that. I'm glad I'm not a racing driver. I'm not a Grand Prix driver, because those guys have got such perfect judgment. That's what I was thinking. And then the other thing I thought was, it's amazing that Romain Grosjean has got through the weekend without hitting that. Ooh, shouldn't be saying that. But then, of course, as soon as I thought that, he did hit one of the foam barriers, and everything went flying there. But that was only a foam barrier. It wasn't the concrete wall. Now, but the point I was going to make was that Tabac Corner at Monaco used to be just a guardrail on the apex there. And I've seen both Ralf Schumacher in the Toyota, and before that Martin Brundle in the Tyrrell, just turn into that apex, basically miss the apex by about an inch or whatever, hit that guardrail, have a massive shunt into the guardrail onto the other side. So it's tantamount to that. But, you know, in fairness to Ralf and Martin, they were in a race. So actually, in Ralph's case, it was qualifying. I think they were both in qualifying, actually, if I think about it. Anyway, they were on the racetrack. Whereas in Carlos' case, he was off the racetrack. That's the most bizarre thing of all. And it seems a bit odd to me that, you know, they can go as quickly as they go through that chicane and have the sort of shunt that Carlos Sainz had, and yet Lewis Hamilton gets a 10-second penalty for doing a standing start at the end of the pit lane away from everything. And he's not stupid. I mean, he's not going to do it in a dangerous place, is he? And he gets that 10-second penalty. You would imagine in the context of that, there'd be some sort of speed limitation through which you can go through the chicane as well. It's just a thought. Anyway, you know, that was a weird thing from Carlos Sainz, and you know, everybody will be thinking, wow. I think after that one, going through the other drives, Charles Leclerc, I gotta say, he would be my driver of the day. I think he was just brilliant today. Yeah, he had that moment with Lance Stroll, and I don't know whether the Ferrari was in any way damaged by that. It was a relatively hard bump. But then after that, Charles was just fabulous. He started on the medium tyre, and he was right up to 2nd place. He did a lot of laps. I was hoping Ferrari might actually lead a Grand Prix again, but no, it was too much. Even when Valtteri came in, he came out ahead of Charles, and then Charles came in shortly afterwards and put on the hard tyre. He was there or thereabouts, splitting the 2 Renaults. So in the same way that Max would say, I was pretty happy today to finish 2nd between the 2 Mercedes, even though Lewis had all those other issues. I think Charles Leclerc can say, wow, you know, I drove a Ferrari today and split the 2 Renaults, and that was very impressive, given how good Renault have been over the last few races and how bad Ferrari have been over the last few races. And here's a quote from Sebastian Vettel, which I think underlines the quality of Charles Leclerc's drive. Yeah, that's all Sebastian could say after the race. He gave it everything. It was an incredibly difficult car to drive. And yet, whenever we saw Charles, and if you were watching Charles throughout the race, on board or whatever, there were very few moments when he had anything scary going on with the car. He made the car look, and if he'd been driving around on his own and all you could see all day was Charles Leclerc, you would have thought this is a very, very nice, very fast racing car. So, yeah, just another brilliant drive from Charles. A few updates at Ferrari, but in general, that was all to do with the driver getting the most from the car on quite a demanding circuit in terms of things to hit when it is a difficult car, as we saw with Sebastian Vettel in qualifying. Had Lewis won today, he would have equaled Michael Schumacher's total of wins of 91. Now, I made the point on the Friday video that numbers are numbers and shouldn't be taken out of context, because Formula One has changed its point scoring system. There are many more races in 1 year now than there were 10 years ago, let alone 30 years ago. And on top of that, of course, motor racing is much safer now than it was then. So to make any sort of comparison, really, even between Lewis and Michael, is a non-starter. Having said all of that, I thought it was very fitting that on this day, when Michael's name was very much in everybody's mind, and we wish him well, of course, keep fighting, Michael, I thought it was very fitting that Mick Schumacher should drive a racer's race to win the Formula 2 feature race. Absolutely brilliant. And then to take a podium finish in the sprint race today. Admittedly, a foreshortened sprint race, and I've got to say here, I'm so happy that for Luca Giotto and Jack Aitken that they're okay, and big thumbs up to Tech Pro, the FIA, and to Dallara for both those drivers walking away from that massive shunt in the Formula 2 race today. And in that context, Mick's achievements were absolutely brilliant. So congratulations to the Schumacher family.